I'm Chris Carter here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, back from the NFL Combine. And if you're a Steelers fan who thinks it's finally time for Omar Khan and Andy Waddle to go after a wide receivers in the NFL draft, you're going to love the way they approached this Combine and what I learned while I was out there. We'll talk about that, what I think of this wide receiver class, and your weekly Mock Draft Monday winner, all here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. But like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. A reminder, the Locked On Steelers podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcasting network in the world. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is giving you a way to turn that energy into even bigger potential wins with a college basketball parlay profit boost. Head to FanDuel.com to get started. All right, Steelers fans, I'm back from Indianapolis. I do apologize for this episode not coming out until 9 a.m. Monday morning, but this was a long trip, and when I got back to my home, I needed some time to rest and collect what I was doing. Now, we won't have any clips from the Combine in this show. We'll be doing that as we continue throughout the weeks falling out, but I wanted to give you guys a sense of the biggest thing that I learned about what I think could be the biggest position the Steelers are looking at, and that's the wide receiver position, as it should be. The Steelers wide receiver position has gone unaddressed since in the NFL draft in a big way. They've picked in the Omar Khan era, all they've picked is Roman Wilson in the 3rd round 2 years ago. That is literally the only wide receiver they have drafted during that time. The last wide receiver picks before then was George Pickens and Calvin Austin in 2022. Pickens, as we know, is a Cowboy. He's been franchise tagged there. And Calvin Austin is a pending free agent right now. And so the Steelers really only have DK Metcalf and Roman Wilson as guys that look like they're going to be on the roster next year at the wide receiver position. And Roman Wilson really hadn't contributed. So with that, the Steelers need to be aggressive. And sometimes when you want to be aggressive in a position, it doesn't match up with the draft class strengths. And case in point, that's what's been going on at the quarterback position. It's been rough to find a consistent, a good quarterback class for the Steelers to be in on the past few years. One that where people feel like there's 4 or 5 good first-round candidates who can fit the mold while the Steelers are in the search for one. And this does not appear to be that. I wrote about Ty Simpson, Alabama quarterback for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, after we spoke to him on Friday of last week. You can go read that in the Post-Gazette, and we'll talk more about quarterbacks later. But this isn't the class to be aggressive at quarterback. It is a class to be aggressive at wide receiver. As I said last week when we were breaking down my top 100 before the Combine, 16 wide receivers were in my top 100. That was the most of any position, tied with edge rushers as far as strengths in this class. That shows what I think to be a very strong draft class that's of wide receivers that have varied skill sets. You've got all around fully well put together players. You've got speedsters, you've got combat catchers, you've got route runners. They're all over the place. And I think there were also guys that we'll talk about who performed well at the Combine, who really made good points for themselves in this week of in their testing on Saturday when we got a chance to look at the wide receivers. But to me, I didn't see the biggest thing that I thought, kind of hurt one of the top guys was Jordan Tyson out of Arizona State. I thought he talked well, he spoke well at the podium, but he didn't perform at the Combine, and injuries have been a big question as far as his status and his stock. And so there's talk that maybe that'll impact his stock there. Makai Lemon didn't run. There's talk about he's fine. He's just going to do it at USC. He did participate in on-field drills and looked very good in doing so. And we'll get to his podium interview and some of the rumors that are sending in a bit. But Carnell Tate ran a 4.53. Some put out there like, oh, he ran a 4.4 something. But Tate was never a pure burner. He was a well put together route runner, big body guy that can go up and get the football and still have good NFL speed. So that's fine. But the thing is that when you look at some of the wide receivers that I think really proved themselves, I think Casey Concepcion was one of those guys. Despite people looking at his stammering and his stutter that it was a speech impediment that's been with him and his father most of his life. I've heard everything that he really impressed. He looked good in the drills that he did. There were other guys that I thought really did well. I think Omar Cooper Jr. did really well in this combine. We'll get to biggest winners and losers. But to me, the thing I look at is that if you were wondering how serious are the Steelers taking this, I brought up last week on Friday, the Friday episode, how the Steelers had used at least eight of their formal interviews to address the cornerback position. It was 14 formal interviews, at least, for wide receivers at the NFL draft, at the NFL combine, that the Steelers took a hard look at. And again, those are just formal. So for those who might not know the difference between formal and informal, formal is a designed interview that is a structured part of the NFL combine where it's scheduled. You sit down with the head coach, with the GM, basically with with anyone in the organization who wants you to meet with, but it's like a full scheduled out meeting where where it's just you and that team talking about it. And the NFL Combine structures it so that as a team, you can only have 45 of those. So with those 45, those are spread out. You have to spread that across all positions: quarterback, running back, receiver, tackle, guard, center, D tackle, DN. You get the point. So that's where that's. But 14 at one position, that very much shows that the Steelers are looking at the wide receiver position very hard. And this is just the early part of the process for the Steelers, as there will be pro day visits. We'll look at that when we get to top 30 visits, when the Steelers can have 30 players that aren't local players visit their facility and get more personal time with them. All of those will play into factors that give us more hints towards who they really are looking at. But the early initial readout is that, yes, Omar Khan, Andy Weidel, I think they are ready to say we are ready to get serious about addressing wide receiver in the draft class. And that's something I think that Omar Khan and Andy Weidel, these first three draft classes, we were talking about this just last week, they should prioritize re-signing most of, if not all of, the 2023 draft class, their first draft class they put together. Broderick Jones's fifth-year option, despite being $19 million, it's for a year. That's going starting left tackle money. That's a going rate for that, and it would only be a year. And if he doesn't work out, oh well, that's not a big loss because it's not tied to you for a long time, and it gets him more time to develop. Joey Porter Jr. absolutely got to sign him. Keanu Benton, I think you got to sign him too. Darnell Washington, heck of a playmaker at tight end. Omar Khan basically said all but the Steelers are going to sign him. And Nick Herbig, we talked about it. You got to sign him at 25 years old with the skills he has as an edge rusher. You'd be silly. So there's at least 5 guys that can be part of the new nucleus that you're putting together. And so you've seen the Steelers, they put with the draft classes that they've been putting together in recent years, offensive line, defensive line, edge rusher, tiny. They have done a good job assembling new guys to put their focus in, to build around. And now, after center, guard, the offensive tackle, defensive tackle, after those have been an emphasis, it's time to start turning to the playmakers. And again, I think this is the right draft class to do it. When we look at how this receiver draft class looks, the Steelers could get a first round. I still think that the key is they are double dipping here. And in fact, I wrote about that for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. This is a year to double dip and maybe even triple dip at wide receiver. Go get one early in the first or second round. Go get another in the third or fourth round. And then if you're still have picks in the 6th and 7th round, and you're sitting there and you really like this guy, he could be a return like a Caden Wetchen out of Iowa or something like that. Go get a third one, and that can be part of your complete rebuild of the wide receiver position. And I think it would go very well to set up what's probably the biggest weakness right now on this Steelers roster, let alone the Steelers offense. I'm going to talk about who performed well at the combine with their 40-yard dash times, who impressed. And also, there's a lot of talk about Makai Lemon because some people didn't like the inflection of how he talked at the podium, and that there's rumors that scouts hate him. We'll talk about that next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by FanDuel. College basketball is nonstop. Big games, tight spreads, momentum swings every single night, from early tip-offs to late night West Coast shootouts. There's always action on the board, and now FanDuel is giving you a way to turn that energy into even bigger potential wins with college basketball parlay profit boosts. You can build any college hoops parlay you want. Rivalry games, ranked matchups, whatever fits in. You can mix those spreads, totals, and player props to match how you see the slate playing out. Then you can apply the profit boost and instantly bump up the potential payout. Go safe, go bold, ride with the team you've been following all season, and make sure that if that's your team that you want to put money behind, you get the money as they go up and they impress people in March. Head to FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com. FanDuel, play your game. We're also brought to you by Indeed Sponsored Jobs. Workplace chaos, deadlines stacking up, inbox overflowing, and the one position you have to fill is still sitting open. When the pressure's on and you need the right hire, this is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs. Indeed Sponsored Jobs helps you reach the people who actually fit what you're looking for: skills, experience, location, so you're not just hoping the right candidate stumbles across your post. And here's a stat that says it all. In the minute I've been talking to you, companies like yours have made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching and more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with Indeed Sponsored Jobs. When you need the right person to cut through the chaos, this is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs. Just go to Indeed.com/podcast right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue our episode here. Again, apologize for this coming out later. I know a lot of people love to listen to or watch this show on their morning commute, but Indy takes it out of you, man. You spend all week on your feet talking to players. You're trying to meet up with agents. You're trying to meet up with coaches and scouts and trying to get a chance to build some connections. And I want to thank everyone who did meet up with me out there. So it was appreciated. There were some of y'all fans that met up with me as well. So it's always great to reconnect with people when you're on the road. But I want to talk about things that we saw at the combine when it comes to this wide receiver class. And I want to talk about the guy that you guys have heard me talk about a lot in this draft class, and that's USC wide receiver Makai Lemon. For me, my top 100 board, he was the second wide receiver I had ranked, only behind Ohio State's Carnell Tate. And personally, as I've told you guys, I did that because I think Tate is maybe more of the build of the prototypical big wide receiver one, and he has the potential to fill out and have the highest ceiling of all the players while having a really good floor. I think he's definitely a starting wide receiver, wide array. But Makai Lemon, to me, is the guy that I think could be the X factor of this draft class, and has the best combination of route running, of combat catching, of lining up and be able to do several different things. And I still think that we didn't get to see him test, really much at the combine because, he elected not to run there, as did many prospects who were healthy. And I think that's the thing, that Makai Lemon was at least healthy. Jordan Tyson, there's questions about his health. So there's questions there. But the big question that came up about Makai Lemon started after his podium interview, which I'm sorry that I didn't get to cut that up. We'll include that later in the week. It's just been a lot to get to this point. But Makai Lemon, when he was answering questions, he had like a little bit of an inflection to his voice. And I think he like moved his shoulders in a way, and people were like, oh, wow, what is this? This guy seems like he's just, I think people just didn't like the tone or the, the dynamics of how he spoke, but he answered questions realistically. And I thought that he came off fine. I was talking to Nick Faribaugh about this after his podium session. It was funny, after the podium session, none of us really thought anything weird about it. We were like, okay, cool. He answered questions. He talked about how he had a formal interview with the Steelers. He felt blessed by that, blessed to meet Mike McCarthy. He knows who he is. And so, I wrote all of that in the Post Gazette story that I put up, by the way. Go check that out if you haven't, at post-gazette.com. That came out this morning. But then, I saw people saying like, oh, I don't like the way that he spoke at this podium, at the podium here. This is bad wide receiver energy. And I'm like, what the heck are we talking about here? You don't like that he has, you don't like his inflection of his voice. You don't like some of the slang that he used. And it wasn't even that hard slang. You didn't like the way that he moved his shoulders and he moved his eyes. It was so weird. And then we were seeing Sunday night, Monday morning, but people were putting out like, oh man, I heard the scouts really hated him. They took him all the way off their board and everything like that. And I saw it as when I saw that stuff, I was like, based off of what? Oh, how he taught. I'm sorry. The way that dude played, all the ways that when I did my research on this guy, I was looking up how he is a leader. He is a he was a good guy at USC. He never had a problem. How he was switched to defensive back as a freshman, because the coaches didn't believe in him, but he didn't leave the team because he showed loyalty, and then he worked his way back to wide receiver, and then worked his way up, and then became a dynamic wide receiver. Then he became their top wide receiver, while also a guy like Jacoby Lane, who is a taller wide receiver, was still on the team, and he became the primary playmaker for that USC offense. So you mean to tell me the guy in an era where as soon as players run into trouble or a coach that doesn't put them where they want to, they run to the transfer portal, a guy that didn't do that all of a sudden is a cancer because of how you didn't like the way he spoke at a podium? I'm sorry, I don't buy that. Now, maybe there are some teams out there that said, he's not my cup of tea. Maybe that happened. And that does happen all the time. There's people that thought Lamar Jackson wasn't a starter. There's people that thought, they think all sorts of things about players. That, oh, man, I just don't like that guy. He's not going to fit in here. Okay, fine. But I'm guaranteeing that people are still looking at Makai Lemon as a first-round pick. And so, and yes, he didn't run the 40-yard dash, but, man, when he did those on-field drills, he looked pretty strong. His ability to catch and run, things he showed there, I think he did impress people. But there were plenty of guys who impressed people at this combine. The guy who might have impressed people the most, though, was Omar Cooper Jr. This guy, the receiver out of Indiana, this guy, I think, lit it up at the combine, particularly because when you look at Omar Cooper Jr., I noted going into this, I think he was my number 6th wide receiver, if I was correct, in my top 100. No, he's my 7th behind Malachi Fields. When I redo my top 100, as I go through, the notes that I took at the combine, and then start to look at all the numbers and things, Omar Cooper's probably going to be in my top 5. In fact, Omar Cooper I saw before as a mid to early 2nd-round pick. He might be a bona fide pick for a first-round pick now. He ran a 4.42 40-yard dash, which, not blazing speed, that's great NFL wide receiver speed. I know that people get enamored by the 4.32 times. And listen, those times are important to note because, and we'll talk about some of those guys that did impress with the extreme times. But for me, if you show me that you're a combat catcher, that you're a route runner, and that you're a leader, and you do all the crazy things that the best wide receivers do in games. And if you look at Omar Cooper's tape, he has plenty of those moments. Look back at the Penn State Indiana game. Yeah, I like you. 4.42. If he ran a 4.48, I still would have been like, okay, he did his job there. It would be if he ran in like the 4.6s, then I'd be like, oh, okay, maybe not. Maybe he is the 6th or 7th or 8th best wide receiver in this class. But to me now, he's top 5. I thought he impressed there. There were other guys that were lower on the list that didn't even make in the top 100 who I thought really impressed. Dejon Stribling out of Ole Miss ran a 4.36 40-yard dash. That's a guy who I think might be creeping up, and the Steelers also had a formal interview with him. He's a 6'2" guy, so he has that prototypical build. He's a guy who I'm going to study more tape on. I didn't really get too much of a time to look at him. I looked at some of his highlights, but he wasn't a guy who I broke like extensive tape on. Zachariah Branch, I was impressed just by talking to him. I thought he handled himself well at the podium. He also ran a 4.35 second 40-yard dash, the receiver out of Georgia. I think he still needs to develop as a route runner. Other guys who I think acquitted themselves well, Deion Burks out of Oklahoma, not a guy I had in my top 100, but he ran a 4.30 40-yard dash. Ted Hurst, the Georgia State guy, he's been one of my sleepers in this draft class. I think he's not going to be much of a sleeper for long because he ran a 4.42 second time, just like Omar Cooper Jr. did. And Ted Hurst, to me, when I looked at his combat catching at the Senior Bowl, I had heard the name and I was like, okay, I'll get a chance to look around at this guy. But then when I saw him at the Senior Bowl and I looked him up more, I'm like, oh, okay, I get it. This guy could be a 3rd-round pick legitimately. And he goes against the football. He needs to clean some things up. But I thought Ted Hurst was another guy that showed, oh, no, he's for real. He's a guy that needs to be in that consideration. And honestly, when I look at how a lot of these receivers, break down, like Jacoby Lane, the other USC wide receiver, ran a 4.47 second time in the 40-yard dash. That's very good speed, especially for a guy that's 6'4", and he goes up and gets the football. I talked to him at the combine. At the Senior Bowl. And I think I might have showed you guys, part of that interview, but I really liked him at the Senior Bowl. I thought he showed some things there. Malachi Thomas, he might have been the guy that, maybe he takes a step back. He ran a 4.62 second 40-yard dash. Not very, very fast comparatively, but there's plenty of wide receivers that don't run great 40-yard dash times and then, excel in the NFL. And he's a bigger, stronger guy that goes up and gets the football. Totally fine if he's not blazing speed, because he has good football speed and he has great combat catchability, and his body control is insane. I thought Elijah Serrata also looked pretty good, the other guy out of Indiana. But ultimately, I'm going over all these names. There's going to be a run of guys in the top 100. The Steelers need to go get 2 of these wide receivers, and then they should still keep it open to go get one. Get one of these later round guys, because in a draft class like this, there's going to be guys that slip further down because wide receiver just gets so jam packed up top that there's 20 wide receivers taken in the first 3 or 4 rounds or whatever. And then, people are just like, okay, we've gotten our wide receivers. We need to look at all these other positions. That's when you can get a sleeper like J. Michael Sturdivant out of Florida, another guy who I think really impressed this week. He ran a 4.40 second 40-yard dash at 6'3". He's another guy with the size that you kind of want. He doesn't have, the stats, I think, to brag about over the past couple of years. But when I look at the size and the athleticism, he's a guy that, hey, you know what, I could take a stab at him in the later rounds and see if he develops. Caleb Douglas out of Texas Tech, who ran a 4.39 40-yard dash, another guy that I'd liked him at the Senior Bowl. I thought he made some really good catches there. Chris Brazzell, not a guy as a sleeper. I had him in my 5th best receiver in this class. I thought he showed up well with a 4.3 second time in the 40-yard dash. But again, point being, if the Steelers want to be serious about fixing this wide receiver room, this is the year to do it. I know some people are going to say, hey, trade for Romeo Doubs, or no, sign Romeo Doubs because he's a free agent, but trade for this, trade for Jalen Waddle, do this, do that, trade for Brian Thomas, which, I'm sure the Steelers have kicked the tires on and just made calls to say, okay, what would it cost? Okay, thank you for telling us what you think it would cost to trade for this guy. We'll keep that in mind. But here's the thing I say about that. You got all these players that you've been drafting and developing in the trenches, and you're getting ready to sign most of these guys because you like how you've been developing them. And so if you're signing those guys, you want to have your salary cap space to do that and address other positions that are going to be expensive to fix and might not have the draft classes to fix them. But when a draft class like this stands right in front of you, where you could have multiple long-term starters at the wide receiver position who you could draft naturally into your team, have them on a rookie contract for 4 or 5 years, and pair them with DK Metcalf. And then if you get your franchise quarterback in next year's NFL draft class, they can be, part of the crew that makes it easier on that quarterback to just become part of the offense. Why not take that shot? Why not make this where you make your stand on wide receiver in the NFL draft? Build the way the best Steelers teams have been built, through the draft. I think that just makes a lot of sense for Omar Khan, Andy Weidel, Mike McCarthy, everyone involved. Double dip at wide receiver, double dip early, and hey, maybe even triple dip if you get to the bottom of this draft class and there's that guy that you really, really like, but just couldn't take because he didn't check these other boxes for you that these other guys checked up top. Wide receivers a heck of a class this year, and we'll break down more film on them. We'll talk more about these guys in depth, but I wanted to get you guys my readout from there. It is Monday, which means we got to do Mock Draft Monday. We do have a winner for this week's Mock Draft Monday. We'll get into that next year on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, remind you, this show is brought to you by Game Time. There's nothing like being in an NBA arena, the crowd, the energy, the moment. Getting tickets, though, that's the part that's not always been so simple. That's why Game Time has the go-to app for scoring tickets fast without the hassle. It puts the advantage back where it belongs with the fans. Pull up the Game Time app, pick an upcoming NBA game, and you'll have tickets locked in within minutes. You'll love seeing the all-in price up front, no surprise fees at checkout. The Game Time app lets you see the view from your seat before you select it, giving you full control. The Zone Deals is a great feature that helps you save money while finding great seats. You pick the section, Game Time picks the seats, and you save even more. Great last-minute options, too, with NBA tickets showing up at solid prices. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms and conditions apply. Again, download the app, make an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today and get back to being there live. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Let's get to Mock Draft Monday and our Mock Draft Monday winner. As always, I didn't get to post it on Friday like normal, so I apologize to everyone that looks for the post on Friday. But over the weekend, I always post on my Twitter, my Blue Sky, or the Locked On Steelers Facebook group. Hey guys, this is this week's rule, but Mock Draft Monday, you get to post, send me screenshots of your picks. It's always going to be 7 rounds. I'm never going to do just the 3-round mocks, so do that where you can. And then I post rules. And this week's rule was based off of what I was seeing the Steelers do at the combine. And that was, I was seeing them put emphasis on wide receiver, on corner, on safety. So wide receiver and defensive back as a whole. So what was my rule for this week? My rule was, for those who might have missed it, was 2 wide receivers and 2 defensive backs. So it could be safety or corner, all picked within the top 100 of the draft. So basically the Steelers already have right now 5 top 100 picks with their comp pick of the 99th overall pick, with the pick that they traded away George Pickens for in the 3rd round. They have 3 third-round picks in the top 100, and then a 2nd-round pick and a 1st-round pick. So with those, you naturally can at least take 4 guys in the top 100 that would address wide receiver and defensive back. And then you can still, if you still had that 5th pick without that, you didn't trade it away, you can still use that to address D tackle or guard or linebacker and any other position we've talked about. So with that being said, let's get to this week's winner, and that was from Twitter, Greg Warfel. Congratulations, Greg Warfel. You are this week's Mock Draft Monday winner. Your first pick was Dylan Thieneman, who he was another big winner at this draft class. Dylan Thieneman out of Oregon. I talked about, hey, I liked him. I wasn't sure if he was going to be the fit that I think everyone was that people were looking for, but this guy ran a 4.35 second 40-yard dash. My God, that is blazing, especially at safety. I mean, wide receivers, when they run it, like, we're talking about 4.3, I'm thinking like, okay, cool. This is an athlete, not just an athlete, an athlete in Dylan Thieneman. And I like the highlights that I saw of him. I haven't dove super deep on safety just yet. Wide receiver and corner have been the primary positions I've done my tape study on. But Dylan Thieneman out of Oregon, man, that guy's going 1st round. And if the Steelers get him 21st overall, to me, that's a win. Now, in this, Greg traded up to 17th overall from the Lions to get this pick. Totally fine here. He gave up a 4th-round pick. He gave up a 3rd-round pick at 85, got a 4th-round pick in from the Lions back at 118. So good return, moved up, and got what could be a playmaking safety. And as I've talked about, safety is such a huge need in this draft class. As much as we're talking about wide receiver, I would not sleep on the potential of the Steelers going after safeties early and often in this draft class. I thought that that was a good first pick made there to just address it. Moving there. So certainly something that I think that the Steelers could be looking at here. But let's go to his other moves here, because he also made a trade up in the 2nd round. The Steelers had the 53rd overall pick. He gave that pick up to the Texans, including a 3rd-round pick at 94th overall, and the 5th-round pick at 159th overall. And I guess this was also part of a trade that he did with the Broncos to get a 3rd-round pick here to get that 94th overall pick. But in that, he got the 38th overall pick, basically, which I believe is the 5th pick of the 2nd round. That got him Omar Cooper Jr., the guy we've been talking about of Indiana. I really like Omar Cooper Jr. I like his tape. He makes one-handed catches. He makes catches from all around his frame. He goes up and gets the football. He does what needs to be done in big games. And he ran a great 40-yard dash time. So speed's not a concern. I think Omar Cooper Jr. could be one of the best well put together receivers in this draft class, the more I look at him. And so when I see him pick the 38 overall, here's the thing. I think that the more and more teams look at him, he might not even get to the 2nd round. But for now, I was like, I get it. trade up because I don't think he's getting outside of the top 40. If he doesn't go in the first round, he's going to be one of the first like 8 guys picked in the second round. So kudos to Greg for getting Omar Cooper in this draft class. And then he got another pick here that I was very intrigued by. He went back to the secondary and got Dalen Everett out of Georgia. I liked talking to Dalen Everett at the podium. I thought he seemed like he had his head on straight. I thought he handled himself well. And then Dalen Everett went and had a pretty strong 40-yard dash time at the combine, 4.38 seconds. That blew me away. I didn't think he had that kind of speed. I thought he'd be like in the lower 4.4s or the higher 4.4s, excuse me. Now, he doesn't have elite production at Georgia. Like, he was fine there. But at 6'1", that's good cornerback size. That's about the cornerback size the Steelers would be looking for. And you look at, he's strong. One thing I remember him talking about was he talked about how he's ready to come up, how important filling in against the run, come up and being physical against the run from on the edge and setting that edge and making sure that you turn everyone back inside was important. That I know that we're dealing with a new coaching staff, but that to me screams Pittsburgh Steeler. Physical cornerback, long, sturdy, is fast, is athletic, can run with guys. Dalen Everett, he could be a fit there. And at 76th overall, I think that's a good fit at cornerback. And then you guys know I talked about Chris Brazzell, the wide receiver out of Tennessee. There's something about him that reminds me of Mike Wallace, man. And, Mike Wallace isn't, he wasn't, Antonio Brown. He wasn't Hines Ward. But Mike Wallace was a dog for the Steelers for several years. I mean, there was that time from like 2009 to 2011 where people were saying, like, it's him and Calvin Johnson. And granted, that was admittedly over the top back then when people were doing that. But he was dangerous with his speed. Chris Brazzell somewhat reminds me. He reminds me with that 4.37 speed. He also has the big size. Getting him at 99 overall in the third round, I think could be a steal for the Steelers. Him and Omar Cooper with DK Metcalf. That would be a heck of a trio to have at the wide receiver position, just in my opinion. So, Greg, I thought you were cooking with your top 100 picks. You got 4 guys there, and you did the exact task I said, 2 DBs, 2 wide receivers. But let's look at how the rest of his field played out. Drew Aller, the Penn State quarterback, he got picked in the 4th round. I'm not a big Drew Aller guy, but he had a big arm. I think people were impressed by the arm. And people were excited to learn more about him. I think and from what I heard, the Steelers did like him in the interview process. I don't think that means they're taking him unless he falls into the day 3 later round picks. But I was fine with him in this mock. Jeremiah Wright, guard out of Auburn in the 6th round. The Steelers do need a guard at some point, and I think getting one in the late rounds would make sense if you don't address it early. I really like Keelan Rutledge out of Georgia Tech. But Eli Heidenreich, the Navy fullback, who I actually wrote about also for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, he's from Mount Lebanon, won a state championship with them and ran a 4.42 second time in the 40-yard dash. Heidenreich, someone to watch out for as like a little extra guy to get in the later rounds. And then finishing it out with Zane Durant, defensive tackle out of Penn State. The Steelers do need some D-line depth in this draft class or free agency, so I was fine with that. But the Steelers don't have to go in all these directions. Thanks for Greg for your submission. Thank everyone for submitting to Mock Draft Monday with your posts. As always, at Carter Critiques, you can post that there when I make my post. And please post it under the post that I make. For those who are like, hey, Chris, this is my submission, I'm just sending it to you. I'm not going to see that. When I'm going over who wins Mock Draft Monday, I go over who posts it in the post that I post, because I can't go searching for all your posts. But thank you for everyone who did post that. Thank you to Greg, and congratulations to Greg for being this week's winner. We still got a lot to cover. What we saw at the combine, I want to talk about that with Alan Saunders, Nick Faribault. We're going to have a bunch of people that we talk about. Who are the winners, who are the losers, and where are the Steelers actually looking in this draft class across the board. All that will be covered all this week on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter, on Instagram, TikTok, all the social medias. My handle's always at Carter Critiques. Read my work in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette by going to post-gazette.com. Find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast every day, Monday through Friday, on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes. Back here tomorrow with more on the Locked On Steelers podcast.